He missed his daughter's Christmas Eve dinner, but that single sacrifice would turn into the biggest twist of his life the very next day. Snow blanketed the quiet town of Maplewood, where every home glowed with warmth, laughter, and holiday cheer. But while most fathers were already home, unwrapping gifts with their children, Daniel was still inside his small garage, tightening bolts on a rusty sedan. His clock showed 6:30 p.m., and his heart tightened. He had promised his little daughter, Emily, that he wouldn't be late tonight. She had begged him not to miss Christmas Eve dinner. She had even drawn him a handmade card full of glitter with, "I love you, Daddy," scrawled in shaky crayon letters. This was supposed to be their night. Daniel shut the garage door, grabbed his coat, and finally let himself smile. For once, he was going to keep his word. He could already picture Emily's face lighting up when he walked through the door. But just as he reached for his truck keys, his phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something inside urged him to answer. "Hello?" he said, his voice weary. On the other end came a trembling, desperate voice. "Please, are you the mechanic? I don't know what to do. My car broke down on the highway. My kids are with me. It's freezing, and the heater's dead. Can you please help us?" Daniel's chest tightened. His eyes drifted to the glowing windows of his home across the street. Inside, Sarah was setting the dinner table, and Emily was surely waiting by the window, watching the clock. He whispered to himself, "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." Inside the house, Emily tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming?" she asked with innocent hope. Sarah smiled, hiding her worry. "Any minute now, sweetheart." But when she glanced outside, she saw Daniel standing frozen, phone in hand, his face caught between duty and family. She knew what that meant. Daniel pressed the phone closer. "Where are you?" he asked quietly. 10 miles from town, near the old mill exit," the woman replied in a panic. "We've been stuck for an hour. My kids are shivering, and I can't get the car to start. Please, no one else will answer." The image of 2 freezing children pierced his heart. He rubbed his forehead, torn apart inside. His daughter's laughter and the glow of the family dinner pulled him one way. The thought of strangers freezing in the dark pulled him another. Finally, he drew in a sharp breath. "Stay inside the car. Keep your kids close. I'm on my way." Moments later, his truck headlights cut through the snowy street. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove away from the warm lights of his home. Through the frosted window, he caught one last glimpse of Emily's small figure waiting at the table, her handmade card lying beside her plate. "Forgive me, sweetheart," he whispered under his breath. "I'll make this right." And with that, Daniel disappeared into the frozen night, choosing kindness over comfort, not knowing that this single decision would set into motion a Christmas miracle that would change his life forever. Daniel's truck pushed forward through the falling snow, its headlights carving a narrow path across the icy road. The heater hummed faintly, but he barely felt its warmth. His thoughts kept drifting back to the house he had just left behind. The glowing candles on the dinner table, Sarah's tired but hopeful smile, and Emily's little face pressed against the window. Every mile he drove felt like a mile stolen from his family. "Why tonight?" he muttered under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Why on Christmas Eve?" But deep down, he knew why. He had never been the kind of man to turn away when someone needed help. It was what made him a good mechanic. Not just fixing engines, but easing the worries of the people who trusted him. And tonight, somewhere out there, a mother and her children were depending on him. The highway stretched out endlessly, cloaked in white. Snow blew across the road, and Daniel's truck tires crunched over patches of ice. After 20 long minutes, he finally spotted a faint set of hazard lights blinking in the distance. Pulling closer, he saw it. A minivan half buried in snow, sitting helplessly by the roadside. Inside, silhouettes moved nervously. Daniel parked just ahead and stepped out into the biting wind. The cold sliced into him instantly, stealing his breath. He pulled his coat tighter and hurried toward the van. The driver's window rolled down, and a woman's face appeared, pale and lined with worry. Her eyes glistened with relief when she saw him. "You came," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Daniel offered a reassuring nod. "You did the right thing, calling. Let's get you back on the road." Through the frosted glass, Daniel glimpsed two children huddled in the back seat under a thin blanket. Their noses were red, and their breath came out in small clouds. One of them, a boy of maybe 8, gave him a weak wave, while the younger girl clutched a stuffed bear tightly to her chest. Daniel's chest ached. He thought of Emily, probably still sitting at the table with her crayon card waiting for him. Shaking off the thought, he got to work. He popped the hood, and the engine's lifeless state greeted him instantly. Frozen battery, clogged fuel line. It wouldn't be an easy fix in this weather, but he wasn't about to give up. His hands, stiff with cold, moved quickly and surely. He fetched tools from his truck, his breath fogging with every exhale. Time dragged on as he battled frozen bolts, numb fingers, and stubborn machinery. The mother occasionally opened the door to check on him, her voice shaky with gratitude. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't picked up. Everyone else I called." No one answered. Daniel gave her a small smile, though his teeth were chattering. "You're not alone now. We'll get you moving." Minutes turned into hours. The snow fell heavily, covering his shoulders and hair in white. Daniel ignored the sting in his fingertips, the ache in his back, and the gnawing thought of the cold dinner waiting at home. He tightened the last clamp, poured in antifreeze, and checked the ignition cables once more. Finally, Kama has signaled the mother to try the key. The van coughed once, twice. Then, with a roar, the engine came alive. The children's cheers rang out. Inside the van, muffled but joyful. The boy pressed his hands to the window and mouthed, "Thank you." Daniel let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. His body was exhausted, but his heart swelled. The mother stepped out, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given us more than help tonight. You've given us safety." Daniel waved off her words gently. "Just get your kids home warm. That's all the thanks I need." By the time the van disappeared into the snowy night, Daniel stood alone by his truck. He leaned against the cold metal for a moment, catching his breath. His heart was heavy. He knew what awaited him at home, an empty table, cold plates, and his daughter asleep, disappointed once again. As he climbed into his truck and turned the key, he whispered into the stillness, "I did the right thing, didn't I?" The engine hummed softly in reply. And with that, Daniel began the lonely drive back, unaware that the seeds of his sacrifice had already been planted. Seeds that would bloom into a miracle he never could have imagined. The drive back home was quiet. Snow fell heavily now, cloaking the road in white. Daniel's wipers squeaked back and forth, but his thoughts were louder than the storm. He kept picturing Emily, waiting at the table, her little card sitting untouched beside her plate. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the neighborhood was asleep. Christmas lights still glowed faintly from porches, but the joy had faded into silence. Daniel parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a long moment. Through the window, he could see Sarah clearing the table. The food was untouched, plates still set, candles melted down to wax puddles. Emily was no longer there. She had likely fallen asleep, waiting. A lump formed in his throat. He pushed open the truck door and trudged inside, snow clinging to his boots. "Daniel?" Sarah's voice was soft but tired. She glanced up from the dishes, her face pale with disappointment. "You missed it. Emily tried to stay awake, but—" Her voice trailed off. Daniel hung his coat, guilt weighing him down. "I didn't plan for it, Sarah. There was a mother out there with her kids. They were freezing. I couldn't just leave them." Sarah sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "I know who you are. That's why I love you. But sometimes it feels like we come second to everyone else." Her words pierced him deeper than the cold ever had. He walked over to Emily's room. She was fast asleep, her tiny hand resting on the crayon card she had made for him. Carefully, he knelt, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Princess. I promise I'll make it up to you." But even as he whispered, a part of him wondered if his promises still meant anything. The next morning, Daniel woke early. He didn't expect much of a Christmas day. Emily would still be hurt, and Sarah would still be distant. He sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, trying to push away the ache in his chest. That's when the sound of a car engine outside caught his attention. He frowned. Few people were out on Christmas morning, especially in the snow. Curious, he set down his mug and stepped to the window. A sleek black sedan pulled into his driveway. It was far too polished, far too expensive for anyone in their quiet little neighborhood. The driver's door opened, and to Daniel's surprise, the woman from last night stepped out, her face no longer etched with fear, but with relief and gratitude. Behind her, 2 children bundled in warm coats rushed to wave excitedly at Daniel. He quickly pulled on his boots and stepped outside. "You!" the woman called, her breath fogging in the air. "I don't even know your last name, but I had to come back. My husband, he wanted to meet you himself." Daniel blinked in confusion. "Your husband?" Before she could answer, the back door of the sedan opened. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped out, his coat long and tailored, his presence commanding. His shoes crunched against the snow as he walked toward Daniel, hand extended. "You're the man who saved my family last night," the stranger said, his voice deep and certain. He gripped Daniel's hand firmly. "I don't know how to thank you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing what anyone should have done. They were stranded." The man smiled faintly. "Not everyone would have left their home, their family on Christmas Eve, but you did, and because of that, my children are safe." Behind him, the little boy called out, "Mommy said you're a hero!" His younger sister clutched her stuffed bear and nodded eagerly. Daniel's heart swelled, though he tried to stay humble. "I'm no hero. I just fixed a car." But deep down, he couldn't deny the warmth spreading through him. For the first time since the night before, he felt a flicker of peace. The man placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "My name is Richard Grant. Perhaps you've heard of me." Daniel shook his head. He hadn't. Richard gave a small smile. "That doesn't matter. What matters is you've proven something rare to me, compassion, even when it costs you personally. And that's something I can't ignore." Daniel frowned slightly, unsure of what Richard meant. Richard leaned closer, his eyes sharp with sincerity. "I don't make promises lightly, but because of what you did last night, your life is about to change." Daniel stood frozen in the snow, unable to make sense of the words. He had gone to bed the night before feeling forgotten, unnoticed, guilty for missing his daughter's Christmas Eve. And now, on Christmas morning, a stranger was standing in his driveway, speaking of change, of recognition. A strange feeling stirred in him, part disbelief, part hope. He didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time, he sensed the storm in his life might give way to something brighter. For a long moment, Daniel stood in silence, his breath visible in the frosty air as Richard's words echoed. Because of what you did last night, your life is about to change. He didn't know whether to believe them. People didn't say things like that to men like him. He was just a mechanic in a small town, living paycheck to paycheck, always one unexpected bill away from worry. And yet, Richard's eyes carried no trace of casual kindness. They were the eyes of a man used to keeping his word. "Mr. Grant, I don't understand," Daniel finally said, shifting uneasily. "I fixed a car. That's all." Richard smiled faintly. "That's not all. You left your family on Christmas Eve, when most men would have ignored the call. You gave my wife and children something money can't buy. Safety, trust, hope. Do you realize how rare that is?" Daniel lowered his gaze. Compliments never sat easily with him. He lived a life where hard work was expected, not celebrated. The children giggled as they played with the snow near the sedan. Their mother, still looking at Daniel with gratitude, gently called out, "Be careful, kids." Sarah, watching through the window, finally stepped outside, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Her eyes flicked between Daniel and the stranger in the long coat. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Daniel turned toward her, uncertain. "Sarah, this is Richard Grant. His family was the one I helped last night." Richard stepped forward politely and shook her hand. "Your husband is the reason my children are alive and well today. He deserves more than just thanks." Sarah glanced at Daniel, surprise flickering across her face. She knew her husband's compassion, but she hadn't expected this man, clearly someone of means, to stand here on their driveway on Christmas morning. Inside, Emily pressed her face against the window, curiosity lighting up her little eyes. She spotted the children outside and immediately ran to get her boots. A moment later, she was outside, laughing and tossing snowballs with them, as if they had known each other forever. Daniel watched her, his guilt from the night before easing just slightly. Maybe missing the dinner hadn't stolen her joy after all. Richard cleared his throat, pulling Daniel's focus back. "I won't take more of your morning," he said firmly. "But I'll return tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, something important." Before Daniel could protest or ask what he meant, Richard motioned for his family to gather. The children waved their goodbyes. The mother gave Daniel one last heartfelt smile, and soon the sleek sedan rolled away, its tires crunching over the snow. Daniel and Sarah stood side by side in the driveway, watching the car disappear into the distance. Sarah finally spoke, her voice careful. "Who is that man?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I think he's someone who doesn't make empty promises." Later that evening, as the house filled with the smell of reheated dinner and Emily proudly showed her new friend's stuffed bear gift to her mother, Daniel found himself lost in thought. What could Richard possibly want with a mechanic from a forgotten town? The thought lingered in his mind as he tucked Emily into bed. She clutched her handmade card and whispered, "Daddy, did you help them last night?" Daniel nodded softly. "Yes, Princess. I helped." Her eyes sparkled. "Then that means you're a hero." The word struck him harder than anything Richard had said. To his daughter, he wasn't just a man who fixed cars. He was something greater. That night, Daniel lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside him. He replayed Richard's words again and again. Your life is about to change. Was it possible? Could one act of kindness truly shift the course of his future? Or was it just a wealthy man's way of saying thank you before disappearing forever? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but so did the quiet spark of hope, a spark he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, Daniel fell asleep with more questions than worries, because deep down he sensed something was coming. And whatever it was going to test not just his skills as a mechanic, but his strength as a man. *. The morning sun rose pale and thin over Maplewood. its weak light spilling across the snow-laden streets. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. He barely tasted it. His thoughts were still tangled in the events of the night before and the strange visit on Christmas morning. Sarah moved quietly around the kitchen, her expression calm but cautious. She hadn't pressed him with questions last night, though he could tell she wanted to. Now, as Emily chattered happily about her new friends from the driveway, Sarah finally asked the question she'd been holding in. "Do you really think that man will come back?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "I don't know. He seemed serious, but—" He shook his head. "People like him live in another world. Why would he waste his time on me?" But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that Richard Grant wasn't finished. By mid-morning, Daniel had gone out to the garage, not to work, but to distract himself by tidying the clutter of tools and spare parts. His mind was restless, wandering between worry and hope. Then he heard it. The low purr of an engine. Not the sputtering cough of an old pickup or a neighbor's sedan, but something sleek and powerful. He stepped out of the garage just in time to see the same black car from yesterday glide to a stop at the curb. Richard Grant stepped out once more, dressed impeccably despite the cold, his shoes crunching against the snow. There was no family with him this time, just a man with a purpose. "Daniel," Richard greeted warmly, striding forward. "I hope I'm not intruding." Daniel wiped his hands nervously on a rag. "Not at all. I wasn't sure if you'd really come." Richard's smile was faint, but his eyes were sharp. "I gave you my word, and when I give my word, I keep it." They stepped inside, where Sarah welcomed Richard politely, offering him coffee. He declined with a small wave of his hand, his attention fixed firmly on Daniel. "I'll get straight to the point," Richard said, settling into a chair at the table. "I run a chain of auto companies. Service centers, dealerships, and even manufacturing plants. It's my life's work." Daniel raised his eyebrows, unsure why he was being told this. Richard leaned forward slightly. "When my wife told me what happened last night, I realized something. In my world, people chase profit, competition, and numbers, but men like you, men who still choose compassion over convenience, are rare. And rare men belong in positions where they can make a real difference." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "I don't follow," Richard smiled. "I'm offering you an opportunity. I want you to manage one of my auto service centers. Full salary, benefits, and financial stability. The works." Silence filled the kitchen. Sarah's hand stilled on her coffee mug, her eyes wide. Daniel stared at Richard as though he'd just spoken another language. "Me?" Daniel finally said, almost laughing at the absurdity. "I'm just a small-town mechanic. I've got one garage, a stack of overdue bills, and tools older than my truck. I'm not cut out for corporate anything." Richard shook his head. "You're wrong. Skills can be taught. Loyalty, compassion, dedication, those can't. You've already proven you have them." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but Richard raised a hand. "I don't expect an answer right this second. Think about it. Talk it over with your wife. But understand this. What you did last night didn't go unnoticed. You showed me something money can't buy. And I don't make offers lightly." For the first time in years, Daniel felt speechless. He glanced at Sarah, who was still staring at Richard in shock. Emily peeked around the corner, sensing something important was happening, but not fully understanding. Richard stood, buttoning his coat. "I'll leave you to think it over. Tomorrow I'll return for your answer." With that, he walked to the door, his presence filling the small home even as he left. The black car pulled away, its taillights fading down the snowy street. Inside, the silence was deafening. Sarah finally turned to Daniel, her voice hushed. "Did that just happen?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, still reeling. I think it did." Emily tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, Are we going to be rich? Now? She asked innocently, her wide eyes sparkling with hope. Daniel chuckled softly, though his chest tightened with the weight of the decision. He had spent years struggling, scraping by, always wondering if he was enough. And now, in one unexpected twist, a stranger had opened the door to a future he'd never even dreamed of. As he looked at Sarah and Emily, Daniel, this wasn't just about him. This was about the family he'd missed dinner for, the people he loved more than anything. The question lingered in the air. Was he ready to step into a new life? That night, the Grant family's visit lingered in Daniel's home like a dream he couldn't quite wake from. The sound of Richard's steady voice, the weight of his words, and the sheer possibility of what had been offered left Daniel restless. He lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sarah shifted beside him. Finally, she broke the silence. "Daniel," she whispered, "what if this is real?" He exhaled heavily. "That's what scares me. What if it is?" Sarah turned toward him, her eyes soft but firm. "You've worked yourself to the bone for years. You've missed dinners, birthdays, even holidays, just to keep this family afloat. And now, someone's finally seeing you for the man you are. Doesn't that mean something?" Daniel rubbed his face with his hands. "It means everything. But what if I'm not enough? Richard Grant runs empires. I'm just a guy with a wrench and an old garage." Sarah placed her hand on his. "You're more than that. And maybe this is the moment we've been waiting for." The next morning came quickly. Daniel opened the garage out of habit, though his mind wasn't on the pile of cars waiting. His hands moved automatically, tightening bolts, checking oil, while his thoughts spun in circles. Could I really run a service center? Could I really lead others? By mid-afternoon, the familiar hum of the black sedan approached once again. Daniel wiped the grease from his hands, his pulse quickening. Richard stepped out, looking as composed as ever. But this time, his tone carried even more. "Wait! Have you thought about my offer?" he asked directly. Daniel hesitated, searching for words. I don't know. I don't want to accept something I can't handle." Richard studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "That answer tells me you can handle it." Daniel frowned. "How's that?" Richard smiled faintly. "Because real leaders doubt themselves at first. They ask if they're worthy. It's the arrogant ones who fail. You're humble, hardworking, and selfless. That's exactly what I'm looking for." Sarah stepped outside then, holding Emily's hand. The little girl waved shyly at Richard. "Mr. Grant," Sarah said politely, "why us? Out of everyone in the world, why are you here offering this?" Richard's expression softened. "Because your husband gave my family something money couldn't buy. I've spent years surrounded by businessmen, investors, people who see numbers before they see faces. But last night, a stranger chose compassion over comfort. And I can't let that go unnoticed." He turned back to Daniel. "I'm not just offering a job. I'm offering stability, growth, and a future for your family. You won't have to wonder if the lights will stay on, or if your daughter can afford her education. I'll make sure of it." Emily tilted her head. "Does that mean Daddy won't miss dinner anymore?" The innocent question pierced Daniel's heart. He crouched down and pulled her close. "No, sweetheart. It means Daddy will be here more than ever." Richard smiled knowingly, still comma. Daniel felt a weight pressing on his chest. This is a big step. I'd be leaving behind my garage, my routine, everything I know. Richard placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Sometimes leaving the familiar is the only way to grow. You don't have to decide right this second, but know this. If you choose yes, you won't just be working for me. You'll be standing beside me. I'll guide you, mentor you, and make sure you succeed. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Daniel's throat tightened. For years he had carried burdens alone, without recognition, without a safety net. And now, someone was offering not just a job, but belief in him. That evening, after Richard drove away once more, Daniel sat at the dinner table with Sarah and Emily. The candles glowed softly, the warmth of the room pressing against the cold. Outside, Emily held up her crayon card again. "Daddy, maybe this is your Christmas miracle." Daniel looked at the card, then at Sarah, then at his daughter's hopeful eyes. He felt the truth of her words deep inside. This wasn't just an offer. This was a second chance. Not only to build a future, but to be present for the moments that mattered most. And for the first time, Daniel felt ready to say yes. Snowflakes drifted lazily outside the window, dusting Maplewood in a soft white blanket. Inside the modest little home, the warmth of the fire crackled, and Daniel sat at the table staring at the folded piece of paper in his hand. Richard's business card. It was just a sliver of cardstock, but it felt heavier than the wrench he'd held for years. He kept turning it over, tracing the name embossed in bold letters. Richard Grant, CEO. The name of a man who had seen something in him that Daniel wasn't even sure he saw in himself. Sarah set down 2 mugs of cocoa and sat. Across from him, her eyes calm but searching. "You've been staring at that card for an hour, Daniel. What's going through your head?" He sighed, rubbing his thumb along the edge. "I don't want to make the wrong choice. The garage it's my life. My father taught me everything. I know in that shop, walking away feels like walking away from him." Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Your father also taught you about integrity, about putting people first. You've honored him every day by living that way. But maybe now it's time to take those values further, to give Emily a future he would have wanted for her." Daniel's eyes softened. He glanced toward the living room, where Emily was sprawled on the rug, humming to herself as she colored in her little drawing. A simple Christmas tree, a smiling family, a star above it all. And suddenly, Daniel understood. This wasn't about letting go of the past. It was about carrying it forward into something bigger. The following morning, a familiar hum returned, the sleek black car gliding smoothly over the snowy road. This time, Daniel didn't feel nerves crawling in his chest. He felt ready. Richard stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, though the sharp cold made his breath visible in the air. He walked up the drive with a smile that seemed more personal this time, less businesslike. "Well, Daniel?" Richard asked, eyes twinkling. "Have you made your decision?" Daniel exchanged a look with Sarah, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He straightened his shoulders, held out his hand, and said firmly, "Yes, I'll do it." Richard's handshake was strong, almost sealing the air around them. "Good man. I promise you won't regret this." Later that afternoon, Richard invited Daniel to see one of his service centers in the nearby city. It was a world Daniel had never stepped into, gleaming floors, modern equipment, technicians working in coordinated rhythm, everything running. Like a well-oiled machine. As Daniel walked through, Richard watched his reactions carefully. "This," he explained, "is where I want you to be, not just fixing cars, but leading men, teaching them the values you live by. Honesty, care, responsibility, that's worth more than technical skills." Daniel listened, still in awe. For so long, his garage had been his cage and his sanctuary at once. Here, though, he saw a possibility, what life could look like if struggle wasn't the only constant. When they returned home that evening, Emily bounded into his arms, squealing. "Daddy, did you get the new job? Are we rich now?" Daniel chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Not rich, sweetheart, but maybe a little less worried." The transition wasn't instant. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began preparing to leave his old garage behind. Neighbors stopped by when word spread, some congratulating him, others surprised. One evening, his longtime friend and fellow mechanic, Tom, leaned against the hood of a truck in the shop. "So, this is really happening, huh?" Daniel nodded. "Feels strange letting this place go, but it's time." Tom gave a crooked smile. "You've been holding this town together one bolt at a time. About time someone noticed. Just don't forget us small folks when you're sitting in an office with your fancy coffee." Daniel laughed, but his voice cracked slightly. "I could never forget. This place built me." On his first official day as manager, Daniel walked into the service center not as an outsider, but as someone with purpose. He wore a crisp new uniform, but his hands still bore the scars and stains of years spent turning wrenches. The staff eyed him curiously, some skeptical, others welcoming. But when Daniel spoke to them, his voice carried the humility of a man who'd lived their struggles. "I know what it's like to work late, to miss family dinners, to feel like the world doesn't see what you do. I've lived it. And I promise you, under my watch, this shop won't just be about cars. It'll be about people, about respect, fairness, and making sure we all get home to the ones we love." The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly the men and women nodded. They believed him, not because he spoke like a boss, but because he spoke like one of them. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's life truly began to change. The steady paycheck allowed Sarah to breathe easier, their home repairs finally caught up, and Emily started piano lessons she had always dreamed of. But beyond the financial relief, something deeper happened. Daniel began to see himself differently. No longer just the overworked mechanic in a struggling shop, he was a leader, a man who had been lifted from obscurity because of one choice on a snowy Christmas Eve. Every time he looked at his daughters, crayon card taped to the fridge, he remembered the night it all began. 1 year later, as Christmas approached again, Daniel found himself standing in the same driveway where it all started. The garage door was shut now, the building empty, but his heart was full. Richard pulled up in his sleek black car, stepping out with the same calm confidence. Only this time, his smile held something else, a quiet pride. "You've done well, Daniel," Richard said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I knew you would." Daniel shook his head humbly. "I'm just grateful you saw something in me." Richard's eyes softened. "No? You gave me a gift that night. You reminded me of what truly matters. That's why I'll always believe in men like you." Sarah and Emily joined them, their laughter filling the frosty air. Emily tugged on her father's hand, pointing up at the sky where the first snowflakes of the season had begun to fall. "Daddy," she whispered, "this feels like last Christmas, but even better." Daniel lifted her into his arms, his heart swelling. "That's because sometimes the hardest nights bring the brightest mornings." As the snow fell around them, Daniel realized the truth. Missing one Christmas Eve dinner had given him a gift greater than he could ever imagine, a future where his family was safe, loved, and never forgotten. And in that moment, he knew. This was the Christmas that changed everything.